Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this public meeting of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. My name is Julian Morse. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake and Deputy Chair of this committee. I'll now ask members in the room to introduce themselves for the record, followed by members who are online. So we'll start perhaps with Ms. Morgan.
Good afternoon. I'm Shauna Morgan, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Hi, thanks for being with us. I'm Kate Reed, MLA for Great Slave.
Good afternoon. Welcome, Minister and staff here. Danny McGilly representing the Sawtooth region.
Okay, thank you. And now we have members online. Mr. Hawkins, are you still in the position where you can't speak on?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, wow. There it is. Nothing's changed as far as connection-wise. Hello, everyone. Robert Hawkins, MLA for Yellowknife Centre. I'm happy to be here as always. Sorry I can't be in person. I have a family matter in Calgary, so I'm here doing this via Zoom. And as always, I'm happy to be here. Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, thank you very much, members. So today we're going to receive a public briefing from the Minister of Finance on their macroeconomic policy framework. Please, Minister, note that this meeting is being live streamed, as you're aware, and you know the drill, so I won't go through that bit. But I'm going to pass it over to the Minister now. So please proceed with your presentation to committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We have some brief opening remarks, and then I'll hand it over to the Deputy Minister to do the presentation. I'll start with introductions. On my immediate right, we have Deputy Minister of Finance, Bill McKay. Immediate left, Director of Fiscal Policy, Kelly Bluck, and at the far left end, Economic Policy Analyst, Evan Soder. Also in the room with us, Ministerial Special Advisor, Drew Robertson. The Macroeconomic Policy Framework is an internal policy used to provide more information when the Government of the Northwest Territories is making decisions that could have implications for the economy. This framework was introduced in 2007, following 2 years of public engagement, reflecting on aspirations of Northerners who had asked government to make decisions that support an economy that works to maximize benefits for residents over time. The objectives of the Macroeconomic Policy Framework have not necessarily changed, but the desire to strengthen its use has. And so with that, we had not been using the Macroeconomic Policy Framework to its full potential. And so we are, with this revised framework, looking on ways to improve that. We are now insisting that departments complete the 14 lens questions that provide some standardized information about economic implications of government initiatives or investments. And the Department of Finance's Fiscal Policy Division is reinforcing its availability to help departments in answering those questions. We've also introduced a requirement for a reassessment of the lens questions every 5 years after an economic action is implemented so that we can learn together what both does and does not work. We are hoping that improving the use of the framework will continue to improve evidence-based long-term planning that will look better at regional needs, fiscal realities, and the fuller economic impact of government actions. That concludes opening remarks, Mr. Chair, and as I noted, we do have a presentation, and then we'll be happy to take questions.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we do have a presentation which is up on your screen. Just to give you an overall picture of what the presentation will address, we're first going to go through the background, which, as the Minister mentioned, this framework policy has a long history, and we're making some updates to it, but we'll go over the background and how it came to be and what the intention of the framework was. Then we'll look at the current status, and then finally the end of the presentation is just to look at the actual framework questions, which really form the heart of this policy. It's a way of spurring on conversation when departments bring forward proposals, and that will allow the government to look at what the economic consequences are of government action. So just turning to the first slide here, we're just going to, just as the Minister mentioned, the Macroeconomic Policy Framework was originally developed in 2006 and 2007, and this was the result of extensive public consultations and targeted stakeholder consultations as well, which had two goals, and those are outlined here. First was they were looking to get input from different stakeholders in order that they could come up with a policy and questions that would guide economic decision making, and then secondly, would ensure that economic benefits to residents are maximized. And then that macroeconomic policy framework was tabled in the Legislative Assembly in 2007, and departments were directed to implement the framework. The direction remains in effect, but as we'll see later on in the presentation, it hasn't been utilized to its full potential, and the point, what we're hoping to do here as part of the mandate of this government is to reinvigorate the macroeconomic policy framework so that it becomes a more integral part of government decision-making. So just outlining again the objectives of the MPF. First is to improve economic decision-making by the GNWT, increase awareness of economic implications of government actions. So even when the economics of an action aren't obvious, this will allow decision makers to understand what the implications are for the economy. It will also assist departments and government decision makers to understand how individual actions contribute to the NWT economy overall. It's also intended to encourage investment in government actions that maximize economic benefits to NWT residents. So as the committee knows, the government's resources are very finite, so the purpose of the macroeconomic framework policy is to ensure that we kind of get the best bang for our buck for when we try to invest in the economy or stimulate economic growth. It's also to contribute a stronger and healthier economy, and then indirectly support economic strategies such as the economic opportunity strategy and the regional economic development plans by improving economic decision-making, as I stated before, maximizing economic benefits. So there's two components that the MPF consists of. The first is the lens criteria questions, and as I mentioned before at the end of the presentation, we'll go through those questions, but those are, as I mentioned, are intended to get departments thinking about what the economic implications of their proposals might be. And then the second is indicators of progress. So we do have a set of 9 indicator areas that provide a broad overview of the state of the territorial economy. And it's hoped that over time, that data and the MPF will allow us to measure in a more accurate way the economic benefits or effects that government decision-making has on the territorial economy. So just to give committee, just looking at that second one, the performance indicators, and this will give committee an indication of how the economy is done based on those performance indicators since the macroeconomic policy has come into effect. So we look at well, it's not since it came into effect, it's since 2014, so over the past 10 plus years. So you'll see on that overall chart, there's 2 that have had essentially no change, 5 that improved, and 6 indicators that have worsened. So the most notable improvements are in labor productivity. So that's a positive advancement because that drives long-term economic growth, efficiency, and increased wages. And then the areas where they have worsened is probably not a big surprise to committee. So there's real GDP, imports and wholesale purchases have declined. And then the 2 most significant declines were in capital investment, mining, oil and gas services, and that's basically because they're linked to the mining industry, which is, as we know, winding down. Those three diamond mines are winding down operations, so those indicators are showing a slowdown in those areas. So just moving then to the current status of the MPF. As the Minister mentioned, and I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the 20th Assembly brought forward a renewed interest in the MPF and included it in the Finance Minister's mandate letter, which included direction to apply the macroeconomic policy framework to all proposed initiatives and existing programs with economic components to ensure that decisions are based on evidence and recognize important economic implications. And then the government House Leader also had direction to apply the macroeconomic policy framework to legislative proposals, bills, and proposed regulations as necessary to ensure that decisions consider important economic implications. The MPF was also updated, and that updated MPF was approved by Cabinet, and that was the main updates was it was reformatted to follow the standard policy framework that we use for government policies. But it also added a requirement for a 5-year review of the initial MPF lens questions. So the 14 questions will be reviewed after 5 years to ensure they're asking the right questions and if they're getting the right information from departments. And then it also added a commitment to annual reporting. So now well, as it always has been, when we're hoping to use it more regularly and in a more rigorous way, the MPF is now an internal policy to aid economic decision-making. So now that it's in the mandate, the revised MPF means that departments must answer all 14 of the lens criteria questions for each action with economic implications that they submit to FMB or Cabinet, and for legislative proposals that go to the Legislative Assembly for consideration. And we would also we don't believe the answers to these questions need to be onerous. It's just depending on the actions. Some questions are applicable, some are not. There's 14, maybe they're not all applicable to a given government action, but the Department of Finance does offer support to departments to meet those MPF requirements. And then every 5 years, the department is required to conduct an internal reassessment of the initial MPF lens for actions that they've implemented. So after 5 years, they look at those questions again to see if they were correct in that initial assessment and responses to those questions. And then, as I mentioned before, finance reports annually summarize, or will be reporting, that's a new requirement, but finance will be reporting annually summarizing the MPF assessments and reassessments. And the status of the 9 indicators of progress will continue to be reported annually in the economic review of budget papers. So you'll see that when the budget is tabled, that the annual review of the 9 indicators will be included as part of that. So just to give committee a sense of the steps that a government proposal might go through now that the MPF has been reinvigorated and now forms a more prominent part of government decision making. So when a department comes forward with a proposal, the first question they would ask is whether the action has economic implication. And the MPF defines government actions with economic implications pretty clearly, so the definition is there on that slide, but it includes actions that cost money, raise money, create jobs, remove jobs, improve incomes, weaken incomes, or alter the spending or hiring patterns of NWT businesses and residents. And government actions with economic implications also include policies, projects, programs, capital investments, and taxation choices. So, and then it also clarifies that even small-scale government actions can have economic implications and must be assessed by the MPF. And strategies and states of emergency are not government actions that need to be assessed by the MPF. So that is also clarifies that those 2 areas of government decision-making don't need to go through the MPF. And the slide here just sort of outlines for committee how MPF assessments are evaluated. So the MPF is an assessment tool that allows government decision makers to understand and evaluate the economic effects of government actions. So departments have to answer the 14 MPF questions. Again, not all of them may be applicable to a government action, but as much as possible, they should be answered, and compare economic effects across different proposals and government actions. So when they all come to MBS, Management Board Secretariat, the Fiscal Policy Division and Department of Finance can assess all of the proposals as a whole and their impact as a whole on government and the NWT economy. And then that allows for more evidence for decision makers such as FMB. So as we go forward with the MPF, we get more and more information, and this gives more and more data and information to government officials and the FMB and Cabinet to determine what the economic effects are of certain proposals in light of other decisions that they've made over time. And then All of these, as I mentioned before, the MPF assessments have to be reevaluated to ensure they're still current and still accurate. So all government actions assessed with the MPF will be reevaluated 5 years after that initial assessment. The reassessment is completed by re-answering the 14 lens criteria questions using updated information for completed government action. So the hope is that as we go forward and we reassess the MPF questions that are given on certain proposals, we'll have better and better information and better able to predict what the economic impacts will be of certain decisions. The MPF reassessments will be used internally by departments to learn why actions did or did not work. So we'll be able to determine what the most impactful decisions were or where they maybe missed the mark in the past. So it'll allow the government to make better informed economic decisions going forward. And then, as I mentioned before, the 5-year reassessments will also be summarized in the annual reporting on the MPF. And then finally, just to give you an overview of the MPF annual reporting, the annual economic review budget paper will describe the performance of the 9 MPF indicators of the MPF baseline since 2014. So you saw that indicators list earlier in the presentation. And then new annual reporting on the MPF lens responses will be at a summary level and reported on annually going forward. And then I'd also, just as a reminder to committee, part of the purpose of this presentation is to take any recommendations for reporting of the MPF, because that report will be tabled in Legislative Assembly and is for MLA. So if you have any suggestions as to what might be included in that reporting, we'd welcome that. And then finally, just turning to the MPF questions. I'll just quickly go through this, and then we can take any questions that committee has on the presentation as a whole, or any other questions you might have on the MPF. The questions were generated through the 2005 and 2006 public consultation. The focus of the questions are on what participants indicated they wanted decision makers to ask when making decisions on government economic development actions in order, as I mentioned, to maximize benefits to residents. And we've done internal MPF reviews and concluded, at least so far, that these questions are still relevant, and there's no need to revise the question. But we do think there should be some more education with departments on understanding how to answer those questions using economic principles. So, as I mentioned before, the Department of Finance will offer support to departments to ensure that they're answering these questions using the right economic principles. And as I mentioned, training continues to help frame responses. So, on this slide, we have the first 7 lens criteria questions listed. So I'm not going to read them out individually, but you'll see here that they cover a broad range of economic questions so that we can get a full picture of the economic consequences or impacts of different government decisions. And they start kind of broadly and then become more narrow as you go forward. But so the first is that what is the overall impact on the economy, and how does the government action contribute to NWT economic growth? So that is really the overriding question that these 14 questions are trying to zero in on. How will an action impact all the regions of the NWT? How will it impact different sized communities? How will it impact different sizes of businesses? How will it contribute to overall economic diversification? Does the action strengthen economic linkages within the NWT? How will the action contribute to employment diversification with the NWT? And then the second 7, just to put them up for committee to see. Is the action likely to add to employment opportunities? How long is the action expected to benefit the NWT? Will it have an impact on the environment? Is government involvement necessary? So this is an important question that we tend to not focus on as much. So is government involvement necessary, or are there more effective alternatives in the private sector that might be a better answer to the economic problem that we're facing? And then what are the indirect and direct costs of the action of the NWT? What are the tax revenues that'll be generated by the action? And then finally, will the action lead to lower costs for NWT residents or businesses? Does the action lower other GNWT costs or reduce dependence on subsidies? So, Mr. Chair, that's the end of the presentation. As I mentioned, the Minister and the rest of our team here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. I have Ms. Reid first for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I noted that in your deck you mentioned that strategies are not assessed with the MPF, and fair enough. But I am curious, has there ever been any contemplation around applying the MPF to the GNWT's mandate or business plan process, specifically in the case of our priorities of this assembly? There are many actions in the business plan around a strong economic foundation, so I was wondering if the minister could speak to that. Thanks.
Thank you. To the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't know that it has ever been applied to any of the, or to either mandates of the governments that covered this period of time. I can certainly go back and perhaps see if Deputy Minister or members of the team here have that information. It would be challenging in that the mandate itself, I guess, contains a lot of individual items, and those individual items should have this applied to it. And similarly with the business plans, yes, insofar as if there's an action item within the business plan that is, a piece of infrastructure, for example, that needs to be delivered upon, or a project or an activity or a new initiative, individually they would have it applied. But as a whole, no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Reid.
Yeah, thank you for that. And hopefully that information can be shared if it's available. I guess to my point is, I think there has been frustration on our side of the Assembly around, making meaningful, large-scale change right out the gate of when we're elected and when cabinet is elected. And so it would be interesting to see if that macro lens could be applied to the mandate moving forward, even just because I recognize that the landscape is changing all the time. Nobody, when we were elected, recognized the challenges we'd be dealing with right now, right here today, obviously. But to sort of try and take a best crack at it so that we are making those impactful changes right off the hop for our residents, I think that would be a meaningful change that could be looked at and studied. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Further questions from committee? Oh, sorry. Does the minister have a comment? Sorry, it wasn't clear that that was a question.
Happy to take a stab at it, Mr. Chair. I guess I would say what might be helpful is, because, it's going to be hard to say, will a mandate priority focused on economic growth in fact lead to economic growth? Very much then depends upon the things you put into it. But what might be helpful to us over time is to actually take the 5-year assessments and to truly look at those and say, okay, the things we thought were going to produce X results, are they in fact producing those results? And to then use that as we go forward and say, look, here's this thing over here that did even better than we expected. We should do more of it. Here's this thing over here that did worse than we expected. What can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? And then to feed that into the development of business plans and mandates. And that's where, so one of the kind of changes, if you will, in the more recent review of this is to make sure that we're doing those reviews. And not just making a one-time decision and then kind of hoping that it all pans out the way we're expecting it to. So yeah, because I agree. I think with the direction that you're going with this, it was just to understand the decisions we're making and to make, push the ones that are the most effective quickly. Which, if we can start to effectively gather this data, which we haven't always done, then we might be a better place with more information and more data to do that in a future-looking way. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Further questions from committee? Ms. Morgan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for taking the time today to help us all better understand this really important topic. I have been reading over the documents, the macroeconomic framework, the economic review, and just sort of thinking a lot about this. One thing that stands out to me as confusing and missing is the absence of an overall economic goal that we've articulated. So we're measuring various indicators. We're sort of taking the temperature of different things, but I mean, if you could use the analogy of temperature, we're taking the temperature, it's like, okay, my temperature is 40 degrees. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that what we want it to be? We don't know. We're measuring things. You know, there's the lens criteria questions. You know, is this spread evenly amongst all communities? Is that what we want? Do we want every project to be spread evenly amongst all communities? Do we want projects that have the maximum overall impact on the territory wherever it can be most efficiently delivered? Or should it only have an impact in the smallest communities? You know, it talks about how the indicators, the 9 indicators, are meant to see whether or not we're moving towards an economy that is balanced, diversified, and sustainable. I mean, I would love to see a definition of what is a balanced economy? What is a diversified economy? How do we know if we've got there or not? What's a sustainable economy? Can you comment on is there work underway to actually create these definitions of what our goals actually are? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, of course, to the Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I think it's an important question, and I think it's one that, if I might be so bold as to say that I don't know that the Northwest Territories always does a very good job of answering, perhaps born of the type of system where we come in, and the answer that we give is the priorities we set as the Assembly. And then the response that comes from the public service to deliver upon those goals are only going to be as good as the direction that we're giving. So, yes, there is work underway right now to deliver an economic vision, because that is in the mandate as a deliverable according to, you know, the priority, and I'm going to get the wording wrong, but the one around essentially having a strong economy or economic foundation. And so the deliverable became for ITI to lead to say we need an economic vision. But then it's still a political statement that needs to be made about what is the economic vision, not necessarily that of the public service to do it. So you kind of get into this, I think there's sometimes a bit of tension where the inputs or the outputs of the public service will be as good as the direction. So this tool is to evaluate, you know, if we say our political priority is a strong economic foundation, if that's as much of a definition as we give, then that's as much of a definition as we give. But this tool can evaluate different economic metrics within that. More jobs, less jobs. More jobs in one place, less jobs in another place. Tax revenues, so on. It's the, you know, the measuring of it. Whether that meets our political desires or not comes down to the folks that decide upon whether we approve a particular budget allocation or not. And this is just meant to give more information to the people making those decisions about what kinds of things it's outputting. But I do think some of that's ultimately a political decision, and that's, yeah, I do think it's challenging. But I think it's the conversation that needs to continually be had, because even in the course of 4 years may change, as I think we might frankly be seeing right now. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Morgan, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I understand that this does relate to political goals, but I think I can be confident in saying that none of our political leaders are economists, and most of us may not even have like a basic grasp of economic principles. So if you asked us what our economic goals are, we might just say, our economic goals is that we should all be rich, and the government should invest 10 times as much money in every single community. And but if we're not constrained by an understanding of how economies work or what our limits are, then our political goals might never actually fall within reality. So I would love, maybe this is an ideal case scenario, but maybe if we need to find sort of a marriage of political and economic goals, at least if we could have a workshop or something where, okay, get political leaders in a room, but have an economist or someone take us through our paces in terms of like, okay, I know you have this vision of this, but this is how an economy works, and this is sort of what your choices or trade-offs might need to be, and then maybe we could have more informed sort of economic visions or goals. Anyway, my second question, though, and this sort of relates to that, is how is the framework actually used in decision-making? So we have these metrics. You've talked about how ultimately, really, they are political decisions, but for example, if you take a project through this analysis and these 14 lens criteria, is there ever a project that fails the analysis, that you take it through and go, oh gosh, like this doesn't look very good. We won't pursue this project because the criteria are saying that the economic indicators are not going to be good enough? Or are we just totally neutral on whatever the criteria it spits out, we just go forward with the project anyway? Like, how is the criteria actually used in decision-making about either comparing one project to another or deciding whether a project should actually go ahead? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so it's not a pass-fail assessment, right? And the way it's actually tangibly used, so the department that's putting forward an initiative, a program, project, they would fill it out and can ask fiscal policy for help filling it out, just as, for example, there's another section in materials that come forward to Cabinet or FMB about climate change or environmental impacts. Departments would fill it out, but can go back to ECC and say, hey, I need some help analyzing what to put in these different questions that are there. So in this case, this is, the material comes to Cabinet or FMB, and it has this document and all these questions that are filled out, has the gender-based analysis plus question in there too. How will this affect, from a gender-based analysis lens, what information would you provide? And it can speak to sometimes differential impacts on different residents of different identity features. So it's all just information that is provided. It's not, again, it's that sense of the operational side of government trying to provide the information and the data to the policy side of government to say, you might want to think about this, but not saying necessarily pass-fail. Then the ministers, the presenting minister may well want to sort of highlight certain features. If it's a data point where it's like, look, there's a bunch of jobs being created, I think this is a good thing. Versus, hey, colleagues, there's no jobs being created here, no money being used, but gee, isn't it great? We're gonna, have a longer term efficiency, there's gonna be long-term tax revenue created, whatever it might be. But it really is it's that. Which then kind of harkens a bit back to your first question, I think, which is how we define, what is an economic good? What is good economics? What is sustainable economics? And I do think there's political tension in that question that's why there's not a pass-fail necessarily, because some folks may well say, I'll take less GDP in exchange for, whatever. Or I want only projects that you can assure me create tangible financial growth. So, yeah, it's all it can do is provide more information so that, when any one of us is looking at it, it's available. And I was going to ask, I don't know, are the guidelines something that is, if it's publicly available or not? I don't know. We do, because there is guidelines for how departments can fill this out and what kind of way they answer those questions. But yeah, so Mr. Chairman, what we might do is provide that. I wasn't sure if it was in your background materials before today or not, but that's what departments use to understand kind of what kind of things to put in those questions. Yeah, it's like a user guideline document, which, again, I'll give an example from the GBA Plus materials. What went into them, I've seen them since they started, gotten a lot better over time as departments have kind of learned what's in there. And I read them, I find it helpful to understand. Even if it doesn't break or make the decision, when you go forward with something, you're able to understand what you're impacting. So that's a very long answer. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Mr. McNeely next for first round questions. Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the minister. Correct me if I'm wrong, when I look at this MPF on page number 6 with the red and green colors, So if we take this change since 2024, okay, that's the outcome? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This shows changes since comparing the 2024 year to the 2014 base year, yes.
Mr. McNeely?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and can the minister kind of share, okay, this graph, the way I read it, it's weak in this area, and this area, and this area. So it would, the macro indicators would say that we gotta improve in these different areas. If I'm correct in saying that, what action plan have we got to improve from red to green?
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this graph or a version of it is in every single year's fiscal papers. So for anyone that doesn't read your budget documents and the fiscal side of the little paper that we put out, please do. It's got all these charts in it. It's very exciting. It's very colorful. And I put it out there because I don't think people realize it. They get the budget and they think it's just the budget, but it's got a lot of this background information in it, which is often the real meat of what's going on in a bigger picture in the economy and in our fiscal situation. So big answer there, sort of my introductory bit. But, as far as what you're doing to fix the red effectively, let me sort of pick on the population number, which for 2024 is slightly above, but I think if you look over time, it's usually slightly above, but it's not growing very quickly. And there've been, over the course of Assembly's efforts to grow the population, the strategies to grow the population, which really haven't moved it significantly, but there have been efforts to say, hey, here's an indicator that's sitting kind of neutral, can we improve it? Looking at, for instance, fly-in, fly-out workers, it's below zero. The reason it's green is it means that we're having to bring less folks up, which we consider to be a positive, right? There have been a number of initiatives, particularly done on the part of the mines to try to reduce their fly-in, fly-out work population. It's significantly costly for them to be bringing people up. So there's been a number of initiatives. Maybe it's working, and maybe it's a function of there being less positions and therefore less need to have people from outside of the territory. I don't know offhand. Again, even capital investment, real GDP, well, that's our mandate right now says, let's fix the economy. So you can pick off individual ones and say, is there, what are we doing to improve the situation? The bigger challenge I would suggest is sometimes is the interplay between the different things, like, seeing, even is keeping forestry support services still something we want to measure? Is that an indicator that's significantly important to the Assembly? Should we be replacing it with something else? Right? So there are, questions within this. If you took this one back and you go and look back to the 2020, 21 years around COVID, there was things that were kind of different, moving around a little bit differently. So, yeah, I wouldn't take it as a snapshot and like looking at just 1 year and saying we got to fix something. I think the question becomes a bigger, as we go in the course of an assembly, what is a trend of change and when do we want to try to fix it with something specific or targeted versus not? I think I'll stop there, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. We have one member left. Mr. Hawkins, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask for round one?
Go on, can you hear me? I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, I do have a few. I've got quite a few, and hopefully we have time to get through all these various questions, but I'll give myself two as everyone else gets them. So something that has really been highlighted for me as we've unpacked the MPF, how it's working, how it's not working, is that we seem to do some economic analysis in our economic review. And building on what Emily Morgan was speaking to, where I feel that we may have a missing piece here, and I think the MPF is trying to fill, is taking strategic action based on economic analysis. But the question that I have about the MPF and how it might work is whether we are actually taking strategic action if we are requiring departments to all do economic analysis on their end of the things that they're bringing forward. And the problem with that I see is that all the departments will continue to bring lots of ideas forward. We'll kind of apply a macroeconomic analysis. But in order for it to be strategic, I would think that we need to, as Emily Morgan pointed out, produce some kind of a strategy informed by macroeconomic analysis that would inform what we're bringing forward in the first place. And that is that you would think that that strategy would help inform us as to what we should be working on and what we should be bringing forward prior to doing analyses of things within the departments. And I know that we have I did a bit of a search for macroeconomic expertise within the various departments, and I noted that we have a few economists working within ITI. And that's the other connection that I've started to make, is that any kind of vision or strategy that we're putting together is coming out of ITI. It's not entirely clear whether that is tied to this again. So I guess if I can word this all as a question, the first question I had is it actually a valuable use of staff time for everybody to be doing a macroeconomic analysis of every spending decision that we bring forward to government? Or would we be better off doing macroeconomic analysis at a higher level, developing strategy, and then creating, I guess, a work plan for what comes forward through that strategy, as opposed to kind of doing the economic analysis on the back end? Does that question make sense?
I think it makes sense. Yeah, Mr. Chair, and the questions are, these are obviously political discussions, and so, but I want to turn to the folks that are here who are economists, because I'm not. I'll start with turning to the deputy, because I think now that's a question of, is this a good use of the bureaucracy's time, right? They are not the political decision makers. They can inform us, but is this a good use of their time? Do they see the value in it? I think that's probably a question for you. I'll start there.
Yep, thank you, Minister. So departments have expressed similar view to what the chair said, is that it's a lot of work to put into to a proposal and to go through all of these questions. But what I would say back to them is that it's, obviously we offer support, and these questions are ways to spur your thinking into how will this proposal affect the economic outlook as a whole, and how will it be affect, and then on the greater scale, once we get all of these MPF questions answered and we have them, this total amount of data, we can get a better sense of how government action as a whole is affecting the economy, and ultimately how it's moving us towards that economic vision that the chair was talking about. So I think it goes sort of, we have the economic vision, how do we get there? Well, we need to collect data, and in order to do that, we need to have departments reflect on what the economic consequences are of programs. So that feeds into a greater understanding of the overall economic effect of government action, and it allows government to make decisions that steer them towards that economic vision. So that's sort of the broad framework that we're hoping to create with revitalizing this MPF. But as the minister mentioned, we do have economists here. I'm not one of them, but I would maybe turn it over to Ms. Bluck to add anything to this, because she was one who, and her team, who developed this policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of what this is doing is making a department, when they're taking an action, to actually think about the economy, and you do not need to be an economist to do that. If you're doing an action that is going to create jobs, well, then you say that it's going to create jobs and where it's going to create those jobs, so that the decision makers actually know what it is you're saying, and yet you're backing it up with evidence. Because sometimes you could say, oh, it's going to be creating jobs, and they take it with that. But if you don't say where, if you don't say how many, then are you just making a statement, and it's a aspirational target, right? So when you're taking a government, let's take an example. We're building a road from one community to another. That has to be run through the Macroeconomic Policy Framework. Well, if you weren't actually providing the evidence within answering these kind of questions, you might get away with just simply saying, well, building the road is a good thing because it will increase or it'll decrease the prices from one place to another. Well, if you actually have to answer the questions carefully, you might actually find out that, well, that's not going to make a difference at all, because it still doesn't have enough of a okay, enough of an economic benefit or something like that for an actual store to be there that would lower the price, that you're still going to get the goods from the other place. Or it's going to not create jobs after you've actually built the road, because you're still going to have stuff being transported in. And those are all the things that decision makers need to know when they're going to still build the road anyway, because it is something that we do as a public good, but to know that that road isn't going to be as good as economically as maybe a road somewhere else. But you can still make that choice knowing that it's not going to do that. Or in those questions, there's also the negative economic effects of that same road. By opening up an all-season road from one community to another, you might be increasing your traffic or the crime, and that's an economic impact that has an effect on another government action. Well, if you have those things all spelled out while you're thinking about, while the department is building the proposed action, and they're thinking about that, they're bringing in the evidence, or if they don't even have the evidence, they'll know they're going to have to collect that kind of evidence to see if that actually did what they expected it to do. Because in 5 years, they're going to have to go back and revisit what they actually said. And if it didn't happen the way they thought it was going to happen, well, then they're going to have to explain why that didn't happen, right? And it's a learning exercise that is a continual improvement of what the civil service could provide, moving it from another level.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate those answers. I guess maybe if I could be a bit more pointed in how I was asking the question, I suppose, I think that, staff are making a good case for why it's important to have departments do this analysis. But I'm wondering if we do have a missing piece in the sense of when I look at the economic review, which I did read, I'll point out, and I've got it on my screen right now. The economic review, like, for example, kind of speaks to risks in the economy, but what I don't see attached to the economic review is here's the strategic actions we're taking to address those risks. And I guess what I'm wondering is the missing piece here that we should be tasking our staff who are economists, who are experts in macroeconomic analysis, with bringing forward kind of more high-level strategic analysis that may not come from departments who are developing various ideas? Or should we perhaps have a better framework or strategy for guiding the overall government in what kind of things should be coming forward? Like, we've only got a few major risks listed in here, and I think that we're doing lots of different things, but are we taking kind of a targeted action plan to address workforce shortages? That's one of the things I've talked about in the House a fair bit. So that's what I'm trying to get at is there a bit of a missing piece here, knowing that we've got, a bit of a high level analysis, but it doesn't appear to be connected with a strategic set of actions. It may just be an appearance that that's missing, but I don't see it in the document. So that's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I suppose I would almost suggest that it's, in some ways, this is not the high-level analysis. This is actually the weeds analysis of the individual events. The high-level analysis is, again, back to, we as a group, when we got elected, said we need a strong economic foundation. This assembly needs to do things that will support a strong economic foundation. Priority set. All right, now we go and elect cabinet. Cabinet, we need you to go deliver that priority, and the mandate gets developed. So back to, I think, the earlier question of, does this apply to the mandate document? That would be the high-level analysis, and that is not how this works, because you're down into the how many jobs created. How many jobs are going to be created by the mandate document? I mean, I think people probably would still be in their offices trying to write that if we had asked that of them, right? Like, it's just it's too much. So these 14 questions are in the weeds of individual projects, proposals, roads, so on and so forth. It is a different tool to turn around and say, will this mandate of the Assembly achieve the goal of a strong economic foundation? That's still a macroeconomic question, but it's probably not one that gets down into the weeds of how much revenue will get created and how many jobs will get created. It kind of has to ask a slightly different question. And it's not this tool. This tool's too individualized. The fiscal papers do, I think, try to get into a sense of where we are and what's going on, what's the bigger picture. But at that point, that level of decision on is it effective or not, will this mandate be effective or not, I guess counter, if you will, and say it also is going to depend on your view of what political economics should be. Do we ascribe to a political economics that says in times of economic uncertainty, the government should spend more, which was what happened in COVID, right? Federal government spent a ton of money. Or do we say maybe that's a little too far, and in a time we should not spend on giving wage subsidies? What we should be doing is actually spending a whole bunch of money on infrastructure investment, which is the current iteration of the federal government. So you can see those things play out on a federal level, and that's a different tool, and it's a tool that starts to come down to political decision making around whether or not you want how government should spend its money broadly, and should it be into the pockets of an individual, the guaranteed basic income? Should it be in the pockets of we want to make more jobs? Like those become really big economic issues. I honestly find them fascinating and have spent increasingly amounts of time reading about them in the last 5 years. But that's not this tool. It's not this tool. And I don't have a tool as I sit here to provide you to answer that question, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Hawkins next for round one questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just thumbs up if you can hear me clear. Perfect. Thank you. I just didn't want to rattle on too long and no one hear anything. Okay, so I guess the first part I want to say is actually I really appreciated the slice of information Ms. Block offered. I think really that's a reminder what the tool is. It's more of an administrative tool for the team behind the minister to come up with the essence of what an initiative is and the value it'll bring. I really don't see it, and maybe I'm misaligned in this thought, but I don't see it as an MLA tool. Because if we think of ourselves as we're the ones who are the critics for better or for worse of policy, and just because we support it doesn't change that role. It's just the essence of the business case people who compile that information as the proposal with the limited funds, trying to ask the question, if we spend dollars on A or we spend dollars on B or C, where do we get this best bang or the longer term investment? And to me, I think that's a departmental tool, maybe. And, it's the old, like I'm willing to see the forest for the trees, but vice versa. I think it's the question is just how far down into the level of detail do we want? I'm going to say I think the macroeconomic policy really belongs in the hands of the department, and maybe just I think we are provided I hate to say it, the nuts and bolts or the watered down version of this project, be it a road. We'll create access. Every grader runs means at least one job, but the fact is that they'll answer the question, will it actually help the community in the long run? That's the question, black and white question I'd like to ask. But back to the analysis, I think that tool belongs in the hands of the bureaucracy, and I just find it too detailed for what we should be doing at the table, which is pointing at initiatives, build a road, and they come back and say, it sounds good. But in the essence, despite all the millions of dollars and efforts we spend into this, you won't see any positive result, and this is where we see it problematic. So frankly, I appreciate the perspective she brings, and I just think it's an important tool for the public service, and they use it as they support the minister through the documents that come through the House. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't hear a question there, but if the minister would like to respond, you're welcome to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, yeah, again, just to not much more to say, but what I think both Deputy Minister and Director Buck are saying is that it is exactly that. It's a tool. It's a tool that the bureaucracy uses to inform decision makers. I would only say it's insofar as that it's information that helps understand decisions, that it could have that benefit when ministers are being asked to come to committee to describe or explain why a decision was made, particularly items that have more, that are like roads. Some areas are less economic focused or centered than others, but for those that are, it may well be a tool that MLAs want to see from the perspective of, hey, can you explain to us this background item? So, but other than that, no, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We have an availability for second round questions if members have them. Sorry? Oh, sorry, my apologies. Sorry, Mr. Hawkins, you have around two.
No problem. No, it's just a comment. It's just in the sense of keeping in mind not every decision is economic based. Some of it's just pure politics, which should be left in the hands of the political system. And I agree with the minister that it's a tool for them. And, they answer questions, but they may not be the questions that need to be answered, such as goodwill. It's hard to measure on that one. So anyway, I just want to point out not all economic analysis can assess the true question that needs to be asked. And sometimes that's just pure politics. Thank you. That's all. That's my final question or point.
Thank you. Second round questions, Ms. Morgan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a fairly short question and then a longer question. I'll start with the short one. Sorry? No, okay. Okay, the first question is just how you're measuring labor productivity. So that's one of the indicators, I think. I noted that in the 2025-2026 economic review that it said that labor productivity was one of the most notable improvements. It was in the green on the chart. But I'm wondering how it's measured, because theoretically, an increase in labor productivity could just mean we just have cut more jobs. You know what I mean? Like if there was, theoretically, if GDP stayed the same and we just had cut less jobs, you could see the indicator for labor productivity could increase, but have we actually, is it a good thing? So I'm wondering how you measure that and how we know whether we're sort of improving in substantive, meaningful ways in labor productivity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Over to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, let's turn this over to the economists in the room, if I could please start with Director Black.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Labor productivity is just a standardized measure. So in the case of what we're measuring, we just go GDP per hours worked. And we do it by industry as well. So in some industries, your GDP amounts are, you can have a low labor productivity because the GDP output that you're getting, with the amount of hours that you have to put in to get it, shows that you're not working efficiently or you have a low productivity. So what we're doing is GDP per hours worked.
Okay, thank you. Emily Morgan?
I have a quick follow-up on that, but then I wanted to ask a sort of different topic question. But like, the quick follow-up is, for example, if you just had more mechanized labor, if a bunch of companies just bought some machines to replace, you would theoretically show a positive sign that labor productivity is increased, but is that a good thing for our population or for our workers, I guess, is the question.
Ms. Black?
Oh, is that me? Or start and I can always take it.
Okay, you can invest in capital, but the hours worked means that you don't have to work as many hours to produce the same amount of GDP, so then labor productivity goes up. So are you asking, I'm not quite sure the question is, labor productivity is something that you want to have increase so that you don't have to work long hours to produce a small amount of economic good or output. So are you instead trying to get at an amount of employment?
I guess the point I was trying to make, and I won't belabor this, is like, we have this generalized idea that, we see it in the green, it's a good thing, we see it in the red, it's a bad thing, but the question is good for whom? It may be good for the owner of a company to see labor productivity increase if, for example, they can mechanize a bunch of stuff and lay a bunch of people up, but that might be bad for workers and bad for the population, and one might argue bad for the economy as a whole, because now you have less workers making less money. And I understand there's other indicators in the list that might cover off some of those other things, like overall income, but per se, the one indicator, we can't always assume that just because it's in the green that it's good for workers or good for people. It might be good for somebody, but I'm not sure if that's coming across.
Do you want to ask your...
Yeah, okay, I'll just go on to the... Okay, I'll go on to the next thing. I'm noticing that I think it's about time that we sort of grapple head on with the concept of this sort of public sector economy, it comes up over and over again that, for example, in the economic review, you see that, okay, the bad news is the economy is shrinking and diamond mines are closing, but the good news is we have a really strong public sector economy, that this is sort of the stabilizing force, and it came up over and over again in like the regional economic development plans in terms of like, well, the bad news is there's few prospects here, but the good news is, you know, there's lots of government workers in this region. But some people take that to mean, you know, government jobs is like a bad thing and harmful inherently, and other people see the public sector as like saving our economy, that's all we need. And so, but I don't think we've really had a nuanced conversation in the territory about how we should strategically use a public sector dominated economy towards positive economic goals. So for example, which kinds of government jobs or government spending would be conducive to growth, which kinds might actually stifle further private sector development, you know, what kinds of public capital investments might encourage further growth, what kinds might, you know, shut out other, or just be really inefficient or not get us where we need to go. Or if we neglect to invest public capital in like housing, you know, that might be a limiting factor, that it doesn't matter how much else we invest in, you know, this is the limiting factor. So the question is, for example, in the lens criteria, it's like, how many jobs are you going to create? But it's just assumed that a job is a job, and that if you're creating 10 government jobs, that's just as good as creating 10 private sector jobs. So is there any consideration in the analysis for if it's creating government jobs or public sector investment, is that ultimately going to be sort of have positive or negative effects on the overall economy if it's, for example, shutting out or competing with private sector or not helpful to broader growth? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, again, I think the guide might be a bit helpful in that, you know, it's meant to have it's not just pure number of jobs, it's meant to actually get into, I guess not a yes, no, it is meant to explain what types of jobs are being created. Yeah, and not to disagree. A guy will say the last few years, we've seen a lot of public sector growth. A lot of it's been in the healthcare sector. So, and or as funded through Jordan's principle in the education sector. So, which I would point out in the sense that I have often fought against the narrative that the public sector is growing out of control and it's really bad, because it has had growth in areas that are directly delivering goods and services to people that are in essential areas that really only the government provides, healthcare and education. You know, that said, and not exclusively, but that's been a significant area of the growth, right? So, yeah, the broader thing of, you know, is a public sector economy good or bad? Are we evaluating that? You know, even back to the kind of first question around productivity, you know, having low productivity is, you know, I would argue not good. It's a political statement. It is a political statement though, right? That if we are having to take a lot of time to make a dollar value of something, like, are we not working the right hours? Are we not working efficiently? Do we have people that are, you know, is the management even sector earning too much? Like, it can be a lot of explanations for why that might be. It doesn't necessarily translate immediately to presuming that there are all automated jobs, or, you know, or not enough automated jobs, or so on or so forth, right? I mean, I don't understand it well enough, but I can tell you there's a lot of writing right now about the fact that Canada has a productivity problem. And we have a labor market problem. So those are an interesting combination of challenges. And the North especially has a labor market problem. If we increase the productivity of the individual laborer, would we have the same productivity problems? Maybe not, right? But again, those are the difficult interplays to kind of get to. Yeah, again, I mean, Mr. Chair, I'm inclined to see if Kelly has anything to add, only in that, again, we kind of have folks here, and with the hesitancy that some of it is a bit political, and I know that, which is why I'm kind of taking the questions, but they're also technical questions that don't necessarily, you could probably get 3 economists in a room and have slightly different answers, but let me take that chance and send it this way.
I really don't have that, Mr. Chair, I really don't have that much to add. I mean, you're answering like, when we're answering the question, does it create more jobs? And it's not, as the minister said, it's not a yes/no question, right? It is, we expect this project or this action is going to be an immediate extra jobs, but there's going to be indirect jobs created as well. And this is what we expect those indirect jobs are going to be. Like, and it just, you keep working down within that question, you keep answering a few more questions within that question. And by the time you're done, the department should be, really thinking through what it is that they're actually accomplishing. It's not just, we're creating, and sometimes it's a long-term thing as well, but when it comes to things like the measures that we're doing for indicators, there are very high-level things to say, this is the direction the economy is going, one way or another in this particular, compared to the base year, right? But the actions that we're suggesting that are being taken usually are coming from the direction that has been made by the politicians to say, we want our economy to be strong and diversified. And we're saying, okay, we're taking this action to help invest in infrastructure that will diversify this region because it will provide an extra transportation corridor, for example, or something like that. And then these questions are going to just tell you, well, we expect it to be this many jobs, and it'll be out of this, and indirectly it's going to create this in this community, right? But whether it's a good or a bad depends on, in a way, your point of view. But the labor, but to go back to your, the measures, there's standardized measures that everybody uses so that we're all talking the same language. You want to increase your labor productivity so that you are not wasting resources, labor resources, doing things that are unproductive. Then this will, this is one of the measures we're looking at when we see if the economy is doing well. If labor productivity is going down, that means that you are spending more resources to create the same amount of output that you otherwise would put. Now, it sounds very technical, and it is, but it's a way to measure it.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. McNeely next for round 2 questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I hear the discussions, it's very similar to my thoughts here on improving the economy, and this is an instrumental measuring tool. And you had mentioned a project. We need a project, and then we measure the outcomes of the project. So when I go back to the Fort Good Hope Construction Center in my recent visit there and talking with the young people that are working around town, and there was a lot of excitement when you start educating the vision that you see to the young person about exactly what you're saying, job creation, training, and business development, product development. There's a demand for modular homes. Right now, you've got other communities in the Sahtu as well as territorial communities importing this product from down south. So, but I don't see a lot of encouragement to show to the leadership, not in so many ways that we're going to measure our economy or utilizing this project, if you want to, share that, and maybe use that as a pilot project to measure the macroeconomic indicator after it's done. As far as I understand, they're going to be closing the facility here in several months. So they'll be ready for product development. But to keep that machine going, what are we doing as a government to encourage that as a going concern so it becomes a viable enterprise? Are we giving them contracts to produce modular homes? Are we subsidizing the labor? Are we developing a readiness training plan for the trades that are going to be needed for the product development? So by encouraging that project to fruition in a positive way, then we can take this instrument and apply to it a year from now or 2 years from now. So I throw that as a suggestion, how to make this applicable with positive outcomes utilizing that project. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Over to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm understanding correctly, really, it's can this Fort Good Hope Training Center be run through the analysis? Can we do a productivity analysis on the Fort Good Hope Training Center? Is that kind of where we're going? And to understand and quickly, if it is succeeding in being a highly productive endeavor, does that justify further investment in it? Am I sort of answering with a question, Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Mr. McNeely?
Yeah, I'm just throwing out some suggestions for ongoing improvements. Just to inspire our government here, the last time I went there, there was 6 modular homes brought in across the street from the Fort Good Hope Construction Center. So I told these young people that were building decks and stairs and so on, this is what they're gonna be building over there in that building. And just like they were kinda, wow, we didn't know that. So when you see the end product brought in from down south, you're working around it and you're building stairs and so on, that's what they're gonna produce across the street here. Then it really becomes a reality of vision. And if our government would stand behind that, I think it'll be a very showcase of a job well done.
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, we certainly could apply, you can apply this to any program or service or project like the Fort Good Hope Training Center. I know that's one that it's not strictly a GNWT project, hasn't been. I know there's been contributions from the GNWT to it, and really those contributions should have gone through this analysis if they were going to be asked for GNWT funding, public dollars to be used, and this should have had this applied to it. But that said, to what extent it's just a GNWT portion that's being analyzed versus the broader project, look, let me take it away, because I do think there's been a GNWT contribution, and therefore, depending when that happened, and I just can't recall sitting here now, there may well be an analysis that was done on the project. And then it's a question of when do we need to go and redo it or update it. So let me see if I can find out whether or not we did that analysis for this. Yeah, thanks. Oh.
Okay, thank you. I have Ms. Reed next for questions around 2.
Mr. Chair. So, because we have kind of gone off on a big wide tangent, I hope the minister will forgive me for continuing that sort of 30,000-foot view. But yeah, when you have slides that say which actions have economic implications, people's brains tend to wander into the bigger stuff, I find. So when we were speaking, to increasing labor productivity, to increasing jobs, the minister knows I would always argue that we can't consider how we are doing that without considering how we're making social investments, because, or lack thereof, because those are limitations to labor productivity, to increasing jobs. Because if people don't have the training or the education or are struggling with addictions, they are not going to be a part of the labor market in a real and fundamental way, the way that they might be if we were addressing the effects of trauma, if we did have extensive housing available throughout the territories. So how does that work? Do you see interplaying into maybe the economic vision, or indeed how departments provide advice? And I'm sorry, I don't have the FMB submission template right in front of me. Otherwise, I'd probably be like, would it fit here? Would it fit there? But yeah, if the minister could opine on that, please, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Would the minister like to opine on that?
Oh, I like opining. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to turn it to Director Bleck in a second, because it's, again, understanding to, I think you can get into questions of how do you define an economy, and is it the interaction, and is it the way that we define the interaction of humans in society who have to barter or buy goods? You can really get into a, philosophical level of the whole thing. And even, again, questions earlier around the productivity questions I think we were having, it's, socially and politically, how do you define productivity, right? And how you define it can then scale where you find productivity to be good or not good or productive. So, you know, yeah, speaking to social investments and how you would apply this lens to it is, you know, yeah, in and of itself, there's a way to do that here, but I'm going to turn that to Director Bluck, if I could, please.
Social question?
Yeah, how do you put a social good through the lens?
The questions, though, do answer the social good. Like, so a social good would be, well, let's pick a social program, then that would go through. That's something that we're not doing.
Some increases to income assistance.
Okay. Increases the income assistance as the example. We would be then looking at what does it do when they're answering the question, so what does it do to family incomes, right? So it would be a certain level would be doing it. Then you would expect in that question, what is it going to do for, like, it creates an imbalance for the working poor, as an example. So it actually informs, if you're doing a social program, you wouldn't just leave it at, you shouldn't be, as a department, just saying, it's just this project that we're looking at. We're looking at this project compared to what we wanted to do is to raise the incomes of poor families in this community, and income assistance. But we don't want to provide an incentive, because that's an economic question, and we don't provide an incentive for people not to work. We want them to be productive. You know, the best social program is a good job, right? So how is it that we're going to frame that income assistance? Then you might have to go back before you actually propose an action to say, how are we going to make it so we're not incentivizing people to not work when we're trying to help them get ahead? And that's where your social questions, like, that's where your social good comes in, right? You want to improve family incomes so that we're not having people living in poverty, although poverty is well relative, but we're answering that question within the questions that are asked in the Macroeconomic Policy Framework to say, well, we're doing this, but we are making sure that it's not creating this bad incentive on the other side. I'm not explaining it right again.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, I'll stop then.
But so I'm going to pick up one more comment. There we are. Thank you. Again, it's about the decision has to be a political one at the end of the day. But you can have data about by, let's say, increasing, again, to pick up my example of social or of income assistance, what does that do to job? Could that do something to job numbers? Does it create unexpected and unintended consequences? Or even the housing cutoff, you know, are you putting people in a situation where we now have to go back over to housing and say, hey, you need to change your housing cutoffs because we've now changed the income assistance thresholds, and we don't want people to be suddenly without a house, which then may disincentivize or incentivize something that we don't, right? So it's, some of that is this interplay where the MPF is meant to support providing that kind of data, not necessarily to drive the end conclusion, which should come back to being a political one about how do we define social good, and figuring that out, but now having some of the data to help with it. So, thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Reid, do you have a follow-up?
I'll stick to one question for now, thank you.
Okay, thanks. We are almost out of time. I wanted to touch on a couple points. The first one was the minister earlier commented about the productivity problem. And I appreciate you mentioning that, and I can't help but take an opportunity to run up the flagpole, the Greenland Economic Report that I tabled a couple months ago. And that's, I want to highlight that because it does exactly what the minister was referring to. It says we have a productivity problem. Here's how one solves a productivity problem, and therefore our recommendations for government action. And I think that's the missing piece that I've been trying to refer to when I talk about taking our economic report and attaching strategic direction to it for what the government could be doing perhaps differently, doing more of or less of. That's the kind of analysis that I'd like to see us incorporating into our decision-making. So I don't know if that's even a question, it's just a point. But I guess what I would ask is, we've talked a lot about the macroeconomic policy framework, and I think staff have made a good case for having staff do some of that analysis. I think that the missing piece that I've been trying to get at is, are we taking kind of a higher level strategic direction in terms of higher level direction to departments about what should be brought forward in the first place? And perhaps what cabinet should be prioritizing, like, I'll just draw one area that the economic report speaks to, labor shortages. Do we have a strong strategy and a bunch of strategic actions we're taking to address those labor shortages? Or is that just a problem that we're faced with that we're taking on as it's not really something we can do anything about? And I'm not suggesting we are. I think that EC&E is looking at it. I guess what I'm asking is the government as a strategic direction looking at it? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, back to, if one of the 4 priorities of the Assembly is to have a strong economic foundation, then the mandate of the entire government should be to deliver on that. And the mandate, if we don't like what's in it, then that's on political actors to take another look. So that's where you get ITI charged as lead, but not alone, but charged as the lead to develop an economic vision, where you'd get EC&E charged again as lead, but not alone, to say, what are you doing to increase our labor market availability? And examples I can give just from what I know of what work that's going on there is around increasing number of apprentices. That then leads to housing NWT saying we are going to increase the number of apprentices we use in our projects, and infrastructure saying we're going to increase the number of apprentices we put in our projects. And then it comes back over to finance, because we have to say, hey, why can't SNAP students be provided jobs within the public service? Oh, because of the rules around casuals. Okay, we now need to go back to the union to fix that. Small example of where that is a response to the priority of the government in the mandate around productivity, and then what do the departments need to do to increase the number of available apprentices and therefore the overall number of journey persons in this territory. These are the things that need to happen. So I do think those things happen, and I think they are happening. And I would say sometimes the challenge is getting the word out fast enough about what's happening. So I can sit here and say in 30 seconds those few things that are happening in the realm of apprentices. There's more happening. I know Aurora College is changing the way that they try to deliver apprentices. I know housing and EC&E are working together because there was a challenge in terms of making sure that someone who wants to go and be an apprentice doesn't get disproportionately impacted if they're on income assistance, that there's sort of a touch point of, again, the threshold between you start to make money, do you then wind up out of public housing? Can we allow students to stay in their public housing while they're still students so that they're encouraged and incentivized to be students, because then they'll become more productive at the end of the day. I know that was a very active conversation between the 2 ministers. I just don't, off the top of my head, know where it's at. So those are all things that are happening to answer the question of this one specific area of labor market issue. And I don't disagree with you, though, that I wish we could get every one of those pieces out faster, better, more clearly. And that is hard, in that sometimes, like I've just said, this issue that I know Minister Kuptana and Cleveland are working on, before they know how they're going to fix the problem, they're going to want to go away and say, okay, let's understand it, let's figure it out. Where in the process of them doing that do we go out and communicate about it? Because they go out too soon and it's just met with questions and frustration because they don't have answers. You wait too long and people are saying you're not doing anything. And I do think that is a challenge in government everywhere of figuring out how to deliver that kind of information. But sorry, I know we're short on time, I'm giving long answers, but because I'm less worried about not having the big, broad, what are we doing? I'm more worried about not communicating the fact that this Assembly set priorities, government has a mandate to deliver them, what are we doing? I think there's work happening, and I'm more concerned with how we more quickly explain to people what we're happening, and then course correct. If someone says, no, having students in housing isn't your problem, it's actually this thing over here. Right? But it's being able to do that in a quick fashion, and I do think that's a challenge. This is where I'm glad that Standing Committee has been very active. I think a lot of us have been in front of folks this week, because it starts to create that pathway, whether a public or in-camera briefing, it creates that pathways for a bit of a check-in on, no, wait, hold up, what you're doing is not going to achieve the goal you want it to. And things like the macroeconomic framework that course corrects also to say, you think it's going to do this thing for jobs, it's not going to do this thing for jobs. So those are all tools that we have to course correct along the way. But yeah, and continuing to find ways to do that, to make sure that when we come to the end, we've delivered the priorities we want to in the way that we want to. Thank you.
Okay, recognizing we are very short on time, the last question I was gonna ask, maybe I'll just leave it as a bit of a statement, was just, I know the economic vision is coming. And I guess the question or suggestion I have for that is that I think that all of this macroeconomic analysis and discussion needs to form a piece of that, and that needs to inform our analysis as we're bringing projects forward as well. I think they need to be connected, otherwise, to have them disconnected, so I really hope that there is a connection being drawn between finances, macroeconomic analysis, risk identification, our economic visioning, and ensuring that as we're going forward with a vision, it's not just a document that effectively says, you know, we'd love for the economy to be strong. We don't really have any idea how that is, but our high-level goal is the economy is going to grow. I'm not suggesting that's what the vision is going to be. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know. But I think that there's a real connection to be drawn here between our macroeconomic analysis and setting SMART goals, for lack of a better term, just goals that are actually related to analysis and addressing gaps and problems, so we can be strategic about how we're acting. And, you know, I would just suggest that whenever I look at any government department, I'm always perhaps a bit overwhelmed at all the various things that are being done at any given moment. And one of the questions I am constantly asking myself is, are we trying to do way too much with too little resources? And I think that the way to answer that question, or the way to resolve that problem, I guess, is to be strategic and analytical about how we're doing things, and to, you know, where things aren't working, hive them off. And I do think that, you know, this discussion that we've been having today about the economic policy framework, and particularly analysis that's coming out of, you know, once those questions have been answered, reevaluating them 5 years later, that data is going to help us make those decisions, right? It's going to help us make data-driven decisions about the actions that we take. So I think it's positive that we're going in those directions. So those, I guess I'll just leave those as my comments and turn it over to the minister for closing comments at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, look, thank you. This has been, I think, very helpful discussion. Very glad to have been here. And how about this? I will commit that our fiscal policy team will make sure that we are part of the review team on the economic vision that's coming forward. But again, if it's a vision, then it's a high-level statement. If it's an action, then it runs through the specifics. I mean, again, I guess it just comes into that funny tension of, when do you need data to do something, and when do you need to have a vision that you then have an action to which you want to assure it's achieving its goals through analysis? And I think there's probably some room for healthy tension on those things, and that's where a conversation like today is very helpful to get a sense of where different members of the Assembly are at. Yeah, I mean, you know, as I said, I just think this was really helpful, and I'm glad we had the chance to have the conversation, so thank you for having us. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I appreciate all the questions from members, and staff's willingness to sit and provide thoughtful answers. So thanks so much for joining us today. This concludes today's public briefing from the Minister of Finance on the Macroeconomic Policy Framework, and the public proceedings have now concluded.